The wind howled low across the plains that night, carrying the scent of dust, sagebrush, and the lingering smoke from a fire that had died too soon. James Cutter, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones from one end of the territory to the other, sat on his porch with a half-empty bottle and the kind of silence that comes only after too many battles. His horse shifted in the corral, ears flicking towards something unseen, and James knew before he saw it that trouble was moving across the land. He rose from his chair, boots grinding against the weathered boards, and stepped down into the yard. The moon was high, pale and watchful, when he spotted the figure staggering out of the dark. It was an old man, bent and broken. His clothes little more than rags, blood soaking one sleeve where he clutched a wound that looked days old. James's hand went instinctively to the revolver at his hip out here. Strangers meant danger more often than salvation. But the old man raised his free hand, palm outward, and his voice cracked with desperation. "Please, I can't go any farther." James stood in silence for a long breath, watching the elder sway like a tree ready to fall. His face was hidden beneath a battered hat, but something about the way he carried himself dignified even in defeat struck a chord. Against every instinct that had kept him alive this long, James holstered his gun and strode forward. He caught the man just as his legs buckled, half carrying, half dragging him toward the house. Inside, the lamplight revealed more than the night had hidden. The old man's face was carved with lines of hardship, his skin darkened by sun and years, his hair silver as winter snow. The wound in his arm was deep, but it wasn't fresh, it had festered from neglect. James laid him on the spare bed, fetched clean water, and worked in silence to wash away the dirt and blood. The stranger never made a sound, save for a hiss of breath when James poured whiskey over the wound. His eyes, sharp despite the pain, studied James with something like recognition. "You don't owe me this," he rasped, voice rough like gravel. James didn't look up from his work. "Didn't ask what I owe, just ask whether you aim to live through the night." A ghost of a smile flickered across the old man's lips. "You've got your father's fire, thought I'd never see it again." James froze, his hand tightening on the rag. "You knew my father?" The old man didn't answer, at least not directly. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him under, but before sleep claimed him, he whispered, "The land remembers kindness, even when men forget." James sat back, unsettled. Few dared mention his father anymore. The man had died violent, leaving James with more enemies than friends, and every time someone spoke his name, it was with a mixture of fear and disdain. Yet this broken elder had spoken it like a blessing. The night stretched long. James dozed in the chair beside the bed, waking each time the old man stirred. Outside, coyotes howled, and the ranch seemed to hold its breath. He wondered who had wounded the stranger, why he had been staggering alone across the plains, and why his words carried the weight of prophecy. By dawn, the old man's fever had broken. James stepped outside to breathe the cool morning air, the sky painted in strokes of pink and gold. That's when he saw it. The yard, empty when he had carried the stranger inside, was no longer barren. Bundles lay scattered across the ground, wrapped in woven cloth and tied with rawhide. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching against frost-hardened soil. One by one, he untied the bundles. Inside were gifts, fresh-cut meat, wild herbs, hand-carved trinkets, and blankets stitched with care. James's chest tightened. These weren't offerings from townfolk. They were the kind of things carried by the people who still lived by the old ways. The elder wasn't just some wandering vagrant. He was someone important, someone respected, and by giving him shelter, James had stepped into something larger than himself. The old man appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, his wound bandaged but his spirit unbroken. His eyes softened when they fell on the gifts scattered across the yard. "They've not forgotten me after all," he murmured. Then he turned that same gaze on James. "And they will not forget you either. You've taken a path you cannot turn back from now." James felt the weight of those words settle over him like a cloak. He had lived his life avoiding entanglements, keeping to himself, owing nothing to no one. But with a single act of mercy, he had tied his fate to this elder's and to whatever storm followed him. The sun climbed higher, gilding the land in light, but the air between them remained heavy. James knew only one truth. A man doesn't get gifts like these without a price waiting to be paid. And as the elder sank back into the shadows of the house, James understood that the reckoning had only begun. James Cutter spent the next 2 days tending to the elder, though it felt less like an act of charity and more like fulfilling some unspoken duty he hadn't agreed to. The man never gave his name, not outright. When pressed, he only said, "Names bind men in ways they don't always understand. You may call me Grey Hawk if you must." Grey Hawk, the name suited him, sharp and ageless, like a creature that had seen too many winters but still refused to fall. The wound began to heal, slowly, though infection lingered like a shadow. James boiled herbs, mixed poultices, and did everything he could with what little knowledge he had. The gifts in the yard had not been touched. They remained, as they were left silent tokens of gratitude or warning. James couldn't yet decide. Every time he looked at them, unease gnawed at him. On the third evening, Greyhawk insisted on sitting by the fire. His voice, though strained, carried the weight of command. "You wonder why your yard is filled with gifts," he said. Not asking, but stating. "You wonder why men you've never met choose to honor you." James poured them each a drink, handing the elder a tin cup of watered whiskey. "I figure it's not me they're honoring, it's you." Greyhawk's smile was weary, but his eyes glittered with something deeper. "Perhaps. But kindness to one man is never just about him. You've stepped into old circles now. And circles, they always come back around." James stared into the fire, jaw tightening. He had spent years keeping his distance from others, avoiding alliances, debts, promises. The world had taught him the cost of entanglement. Yet, somehow, one night's mercy had entangled him in something older than law, deeper than blood. Before he could respond, the sound of hooves shattered the fragile calm. James rose instantly, handed his revolver, while Greyhawk's eyes narrowed toward the door. Outside, 4 riders approached, moving slow, deliberate, their silhouettes etched black against the dying light. James stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath his boots. The riders stopped a few yards short, their leader dismounting with a confidence born of long practice. He was tall, lean, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold assurance of a man who believed the land itself bowed to him. "You've taken in what ain't yours," the stranger said. "That old man belongs to us." James didn't flinch. "Belongs to no one. He's under my roof, and that makes him my concern." The rider tilted his head, studying James like a wolf studies prey that dares not back down. "You know who he is?" "I know he was bleeding in my yard, that's enough." A laugh, sharp and humorless, broke from the other riders. But the leader didn't smile. He stepped closer, boots sinking into the dirt, and pushed back his hat just enough for James to see his eyes. Cold, gray, merciless. "His name's worth more than your ranch, cowboy, worth more than your life. Hand him over, and maybe we leave you breathing." James's hand rested on his revolver, steady but unreadable. "You'll find me hard to bargain with." For a moment, silence weighed heavier than the sky. Then Greyhawk's voice, cracked but strong, rang out from the doorway. "You tell Kane I'm not his to claim. Not now, not ever." The riders stiffened, their leader's jaw tightening. He turned back toward the elder, spitting into the dirt. "You don't get to decide that. Kane says you come, you come. Alive or dead, it makes no difference." At the name Kane, James felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had heard it whispered before, attached to debts that never got paid, to men who vanished without a trace, to deals struck in smoke-filled rooms and sealed with blood. Kane wasn't just a man. He was a shadow stretching across the land, and anyone caught in it seldom escaped. "You've made a mistake," the rider said, remounting with the fluidity of a predator. "When Kane hears you're sheltering him, he'll come himself. And when he does, you'll wish you'd handed him over tonight." The riders wheeled their horses and thundered into the dusk, leaving only the dust of their passing behind. James turned back to Greyhawk, who had stepped out onto the porch despite his weakness. His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried centuries of grief. "Kane," James muttered. "That's who you're running from?" Greyhawk nodded slowly. "Kane thinks himself master of debts, but some debts can never be paid in silver or blood. He seeks what was never his to take. That is why I bleed. That is why he will not stop until I am gone." James stared at him, frustration and anger colliding in his chest. "Then why come here? Why bring Kane's war to my doorstep?" For the first time, the elder's gaze softened, not with pity, but with something like trust. "Because you were the only one who would not turn me away. The land chose you, James Cutter. The gifts are proof, and whether you wish it or not, Kane will come for us both now." The words settled like iron in James's gut. He didn't want this fight. He hadn't asked for it. But deep down, he knew the elders spoke truth. Mercy had set his course, and there was no turning back. That night, the wind carried no song of coyotes, no whisper of crickets. The land was too still, as though even the earth held its breath. James sat awake by the window, revolver across his knees, watching shadows stretch and shift. He knew Kane was out there, waiting, and he knew dawn would bring more than just light. For some men, dawn was a promise of hope. But for James Cutter, the coming dawn would be a reckoning. The dawn James Cutter had feared came not with silence, but with the sound of hooves. Slow at first, distant like a memory, then nearer, louder, until the very earth seemed to quake beneath them. James was already on the porch, rifle in hand, when Kane arrived. He came at the head of 6 riders, his black coat trailing like a funeral shroud, his silver hair gleaming cold in the pale light. Even from a distance, James felt the weight of the man's presence. Kane didn't simply ride onto land, he consumed it, claimed it as if the soil itself bent beneath him. The riders fanned out, circling the yard. James stood firm, his jaw tight, while Greyhawk remained inside, framed by the window's shadow. Kane dismounted with deliberate grace, his boots striking the ground with a rhythm that sounded more like a sentence than a step. "You have something of mine?" Kane said, his voice smooth as river stone, but edged with steel. James met his gaze without flinching. "Man came to my door bleeding. I gave him shelter. That don't make him yours." Kane's smile was slow, deliberate, meant to unsettle. "You think kindness absolves you of consequence? No, kindness is a debt like any other, and debts must be collected." He gestured lazily toward the window, where Greyhawk's shadow lingered. "That man stole from me. Years ago, he turned his back on a pact sealed in blood. Do you understand what that means?" James said nothing, but his grip on the rifle tightened. Kane stepped closer, lowering his voice as though speaking man to man, though every syllable dripped with menace. "Greyhawk carries something I own. It is not coin. It is not land. It is legacy. And when he chose to keep it from me, he condemned himself to run. All I seek is what is mine. Hand him over, and you walk free." Inside the cabin, the elder's voice cut through like a blade. "You call legacy what you tried to steal. But the earth does not belong to Kane, nor does the bloodline it protects. You may dress your greed in words of debt and pact, but you are nothing more than a thief." Kane's eyes narrowed, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the cruelty beneath. "Careful, old man. Your tongue may damn the boy who shelters you." James stepped forward, rifle leveled. "Enough. You want him? You come through me. But you'll find that harder than you think." The riders shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their guns. The air thickened with the promise of violence. But Kane only raised a hand, holding his men back. He studied James, as though weighing the steel in his spine, testing the resolve in his eyes. "You're your father's son," Kane said finally, almost with admiration. "The same fire, the same foolishness. He stood against me once too, and it ended with blood in the dirt." The words struck deep, but James did not waver. He had grown up haunted by whispers of his father's defiance. of the price paid for standing against Cain. Now he felt the weight of that legacy pressing on his shoulders, but instead of crushing him, it steadied his aim. Cain's smile returned, thin and venomous. Very well. If you choose his fight, you choose his fate. But know this, your defiance has bound you to me, and when I return, I will not bring 6 men. I will bring 60, and not even your ghosts will protect you. With that, Cain mounted his horse, signaling his men to fall back. The riders withdrew, their silence heavier than any gunfire. Cain turned once more, his pale eyes locking with James's. "You've taken a path with no return, Cutter. Pray the land remembers your kindness when I do not." Then he was gone, the thunder of hooves fading into the horizon. The silence that followed was worse than the threat. James lowered his rifle, his chest heaving, though no shot had been fired. Inside, Greyhawk sank into the chair by the fire, his body frail, but his gaze steady. "You've chosen," the elder said softly. James turned on him, frustration boiling over. "I didn't choose this. You dragged it to my doorstep. You and your secrets, your enemies. Now Cain's wrath is on me, on my land, because I showed you mercy." Greyhawk did not flinch. Mercy is never wasted. The gifts at your door prove that. Do you not see? You are not alone in this fight. The land remembers. The people remember. And when Cain comes, you will not stand against him by yourself. James's anger faltered, replaced by a grim clarity. The elder's words echoed like prophecy, reminding him of the bundles that had appeared with dawn. Food, blankets, offerings from unseen hands. Silent allies, watching from the edges of his land. He stepped outside again, looking over the empty yard, the horizon where Cain had vanished. The land stretched wide and endless, but for the first time it did not feel empty. It felt alive, heavy with unseen eyes, waiting. As the sun climbed higher, James Cutter knew what Cain had said was true. He had taken a path with no return. But if Cain was coming with 60 men, James would meet him with more than steel. He would meet him with the land itself, with every bond forged in kindness, every unseen ally bound by gratitude, every gift laid at his feet. And when the reckoning came, it would not be his alone, because the land remembers. Because mercy binds deeper than fear. Because a cowboy who gave shelter to an injured elder had unknowingly awakened something far greater than Cain's greed. And as James Cutter turned back toward the house, toward the man called Greyhawk, he felt the fire of legacy burning in his veins, not the curse of his father's death, but the promise of a fight worth dying for. Stories like James Cutter's remind us of a truth we too often forget, that one act of mercy can alter the course of fate. That kindness is not weakness, it is strength, a strength that echoes beyond the moment and binds us to something greater than ourselves. Cain represents the shadows we all face: greed, cruelty, the weight of fear. But Greyhawk's gifts, and James's choice to stand, remind us that even in the darkest times, there are debts written not in coin, but in compassion. If this story spoke to you, share it. Let others remember that the land, the world, does not forget kindness. Stand firm, even when the odds are against you. Protect what is right, even when the shadows gather, because the gifts of mercy return to us, often when we least expect them, and they are stronger than any enemy. This is the story of one cowboy, one elder, and the dawn that brought both reckoning and hope. And it leaves us with a question only you can answer. When the moment comes, will you stand?